Hello, Robert Rogers, and let's go ahead and review Frederick Douglass, The Narrative of the Life of an American Slave. This book is definitely par for the course at a lot of high schools and colleges. It's long been a tradition in American letters to read this book. It is an incredible book, probably my favorite rags to riches tale. Horatio Alger comes to mind, but this one is the deepest rags and the greatest riches, at least in terms of someone going from being a slave to a statesman and a producer of literature of the highest order. Let's see how it starts. I love the beginning. I was born in Tuckahoe near Hillsborough and about 12 miles from Easton in Talbot County, Maryland. I have no accurate knowledge of my age, never having seen any authentic record containing it. By far the larger part of the slaves know as little of their ages as horses know of theirs. And it is the wish of most masters within my knowledge to keep their slaves thus ignorant. I do not remember to have ever met a slave who could tell of his birthday. They seldom come nearer to it than planting time, harvest time, cherry time, springtime, or fall time. A want of information concerning my own was a source of unhappiness to me even during childhood. The white children could tell their ages. I could not tell why I ought to be deprived of the same privilege. I was not allowed to make any inquiries of my master concerning it. He deemed all such inquiries on the part of a slave improper and impertinent, and evidence of a restless spirit. The nearest estimate I can give makes me now between 27 and 28 years of age. I come to this from hearing my master say, sometime during 1835, I was about 17 years old. My mother was named Harriet Bailey. She was the daughter of Isaac and Betsy Bailey, both colored and quite dark. My mother was of a darker complexion than either my grandmother or grandfather. He goes on to say that his father was a white man and that he was likely the master. But the point there is you can see the inhumanity of not being able to tell your story in the most basic way, which in this case would be through age. You saw also Douglass alluding to that comparison of slaves to animals, something that had been, of course, driven into the slaves themselves by the power structure, and also to some degree, obviously internalized over time. So it's an incredibly brutal idea. Humans in bondage, stripped of history, in many ways equated to animals or beasts of burden. All of this part and parcel of just how deep, pervasive, and brutal the institution of slavery was in this country. But let's talk more about Douglass. It's truly astonishing that someone of these origins could rise to these heights. How is it that someone like Douglass can become a statesman of the highest order, an author of the highest order, an intelligent gentleman, a fighter for justice, all of these things having been deprived of so much as a small child in those formative years? Of course, part of it is he's just an incredible genius, and we can't necessarily impart his experience on the average person or the average slave. There are always going to be outliers, and clearly he is one. Part of his genius was being able to become well-versed in the techniques of his masters, and that's what, of course, ultimately allows him to dismantle the institution both on his own personal experience, physically, and also psychologically. In other words, he gets better at the game than they do. Not that he plays it in that way, but he understands the techniques and renders them useless against him. He shows us, he dissects this whole idea of how some slaves were provided the, quote, privilege of having a holiday from Christmas to New Year's. And naturally, that privilege was one that included being encouraged to drink and be merry and generally be indolent. All of that to blunt the impulse toward rebellion. This is obviously an old tactic used some would say used today. It's a way that Douglass shows us again how important it is. Now, Douglass takes on a lot in this book, and one of them is he takes on Christianity to some degree. Now, he's not anti-Christian, he is a Christian, but he does show how a perverted form of Christianity became an extremely useful tool to slaveholders to keep their human bondage alive and to continue to maintain power over enslaved people. From the book, between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference, so wide that to receive the one as good, pure, and holy is of necessity to reject the other as bad, corrupt, and wicked. To be the friend of the one is of necessity to be the enemy of the other. I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, women-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial and hypocritical Christianity of this land. Indeed, I see no reason but the most deceitful one for calling the religion of this land Christianity. So what Douglass is really saying here is he's talking about not the critique of Christianity per se, but of the hypocrisy of the slaveholders and their deep perversion of Christian morals in service of a ghastly and oppressive institution. So he's making a very clear distinction. Christianity is a tool of love and good, and it's a religion that he ultimately believes in. But that belief and that love for can't preclude or can't cloud the ability to see when this tool can be used for ill. I mean, any religion, any technology, any institution, of course, no matter how hallowed or beautiful or productive, can be used for ill. And that is, of course, the case with Christianity during the slaveholding era. Now, some could also talk about today. There's a lot that goes on in the name of Christianity that one would be hard-pressed to argue that Jesus, per se, or even any of the authors of the Bible would support. So the perversion of religion is not something that was only germane to the 19th century. It certainly occurs today to some degree. So, in sum, this book is a great read, beautiful prose, the work of an incredible genius. It is an empowerment book of the highest order. This is truly slave to king, if you will. And Douglass is just an incredible genius, a giant of American letters. And the book is slim, brief, very riveting, hard to put down, great prose, and highly recommended.